Happy Tuesday evening, everybody, and welcome to the Nana Boss Continuum. And tonight we are going to have some fun and we're going to learn a lot. I've got Justin Decker coming up in just a moment, and we are going to talk so much stuff. Justin has been around for a really long time. He has a lot of research under his belt. So I cannot wait to pick his brain tonight. But before I bring Justin up, I just want to real quick, I want to go through and just say hi to all of my Bigfoot besties that are here tonight. Hey there, Mike and Gary. How are you, Gary? Let's see. Oh, what happened to my mouse? What's going on with my mouse? Sorry. I don't know, guys. I don't know what happened. Hey there, Griff. Good to see you. We've got Scott B is in the house tonight. We've got Henry in the house. We've got Miss Jean Hudson. Oh, Jean, I hope you're not freezing to death up there, but it's 85 here. I'm like, I feel a little gypped. Just saying. I'm feeling a little gypped. We got Jane in the house. Crystal J is in the house. Garrow is in the house. Let's see. Who else do we have? I know I saw a few other people, I thought. Let's see. And I know I saw a couple more people. And Lenny. Oh, Lenny. Hi, Lenny. Hi, it's good to see you. Hi, Bobby. Hey there, Dogman UK. Glad you're here. Roger. Hey, Roger. So happy you're here as well. All right. I don't want to miss anybody. I think that's everybody. Spiritual Odyssey. Hi, honey. How are you? Moon and Noon. Good to see you. BSC. Good to see you as well. And just don't want to miss anybody. Did I just see David Lester? Hey there, David. Good to see you. I thought I saw Brian Barber in here a second ago. All right. I think I got everybody. Pyromedic. Hi, Pyromedic. I love you. I gotta see you again, Pyro. Hopefully maybe you can make it down to the Ocala conference. It's gonna be in June. And I would love to hang out with you. We just didn't have it really kind of sucked because we were going back out into the field right after, literally as soon as the conference in Ozark was over, we went straight back to the field. And I just wish I had the opportunity to like sit and hang out with you and Gary and some other people. And hey there, Mike. Glad you're here as well. All right. Without any further ado, let's bring up Mr. Justin Decker. Hey there, Justin.
Hey, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
All right.
You and I always have some of the most like thought-provoking conversations. So I'm really looking forward. I'm looking forward to this tonight.
Me too. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, because like you've done a lot of research all over the country, right? I mean, you've kind of been a little everywhere.
I've been all over the place. That's true. From Florida to Michigan to everywhere in between. Yeah. Born and raised in South America. So I've just kind of been a gypsy my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, you and I've talked about before, you know, growing up, you know, in South America. That was a very interesting, if I'd love it if you would talk a little bit about that part of your life, you know, because it does really set that solid foundation where you really can understand learning how, you know, somebody who's never interacted with humans before and how that kind of works a little bit. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I was actually born in a town called Villavicencio in Colombia, South America. And I spent the first almost 10 years of my life living down there. And a good portion of that was right out in the middle of the Amazon forest. My parents were missionaries and we worked with an indigenous tribe down there. And so my younger years were out living in the jungle, living with this tribe and interacting with them and just what we just call jungle life. What was unique about this tribe was that they're considered a pre-Stone Age tribe. They didn't have any type of stone tools or metal tools or anything like that. Everything was pre-Stone Age for them. They had no written form of language. There was no hieroglyphs. There was no writing whatsoever. It was a completely verbal culture, and it was a completely unknown language. In fact,
Mm,
that's what my
mhm.
dad's job was to go out there with this tribe and learn the language 100% from scratch, which
No
is
easy feat.
exceptionally difficult.
Yeah,
you know,
no easy feat for sure, for
not at
sure.
all. But as a kid growing up, I just played with the native kids, and we couldn't communicate using language, or I should say, verbal language. But we still communicated, and we were able to get along, and we would go hunting together and fishing together, and they would teach me about stuff in the jungle, and then that was me growing up, and I absolutely loved it. To me, it was I didn't understand how special it was and how unique it was until after I came to the States and realized that it was such a far out there experience that most
Mhm.
people couldn't even comprehend, like what my day to day was.
Right.
And you grow up with a totally different mindset out there. Um, the things that I was able to do by the time I hit kindergarten, part of my daily routine was using a machete. I had a gun with me at all times. Survival skills was part of my play. We learned how to, like I said, hunt and fish and cook and build forts and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And learning to be aware of your surroundings and know what's going on. And the biggest part of my growing up that way that kind of plays into my studies and what the way I think about things is I never didn't believe that there was something out there, right? I never had to learn to believe in Bigfoot or believe in strange phenomenon. I was always taught, of course, there's stuff out there that we don't know and we don't understand that science can't explain to us. I was raised with that belief, and so it's like
Mhm.
I tell people, I never did not believe in Bigfoot.
Right.
When I first heard about Bigfoot, I was like, okay, that makes sense, cool. Like there was no big shocker for me there.
Yeah, I mean, when you're brought up in this, I mean, from scratch, right? Like literally, like you
Hmm.
said, like from scratch, like you have no concept of what it's like to not have that belief. And
Hmm.
you're just kind of like, yeah, this is just normal for me. Like, that I don't know. Like, so when did you have your very first sighting? When did you have like your very first encounter?
Okay, so here's the thing with that is I have never had anything happen where I can say this was a Bigfoot. Never. I have had strange things happen,
Mhm.
but I am the type where if I can't tell you what it was, I'm not gonna say this is what it was, right? Like,
Mhm.
um, after we moved from South America, we moved to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, way far north, because that's where my dad was from. And we started a camp up there, and we built it very much like how we built our house in the jungle. It was based on those techniques and stuff that we did. And I spent many of my summers up there by myself or with one or two other people, deep in the heart of the woods of Upper Michigan. We had 80 acres of land right in the middle of what we call meat paper mill country, which is the main forest of Upper Michigan. And I've had strange things happen up there. I've heard weird sounds. We used to go hunting. That was also our hunting property, and I've been followed out to my deer stand. I've been followed back. I've heard something paralleling me. We've had our camp raided, and we couldn't identify what it was. I've heard things walking around the camp at night. I've had all these experiences, but because I never saw what it was, I'm not going to sit here and call it a Bigfoot
Yeah.
experience. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
Um, I have had some strange things happen throughout my life, but none of them Bigfoot related or cryptid related that I would pinpoint and say, yes, that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But my interest started very, very young. Um, just when I got into reading, I'm a huge reader. I started reading at a very young age, and I was an avid reader, and I gravitated towards animals and mystery stuff. So I started reading about mystery creatures and all this, and talking to my dad about it one time. He relayed a story to me of several stories, but the one that stuck into my head was when he was traveling along a riverway one time. Before he worked with the tribe I grew up with, he was what was called a contact missionary, which means it was his job to literally try and find undiscovered Indian peoples. And he was literally a modern day jungle explorer. And on one of
Wow.
these trips, yeah, I mean, how many people can say that about their dad, you know?
Not a lot.
Um, one of these trips, they had just rounded a river bend on their boat, and way off up in the trees, probably about 100 yards or so down the river, they saw in the canopy 3 to 4 very, very large primates. And he described them as about chimpanzee size, very
Mm-hmm.
muscular. They were black in color. He got to see him for several seconds until they got uh, the sound of the motor of the boat, and then they took off through the trees very rapidly. And what really caught my interest there was the fact there are no large primates in South America, nothing the size of an ape like a chimpanzee. We just don't have them. And so
Interesting.
I took that and then I started looking for giant monkeys, right? And I came across the Deloy's ape, which is a cryptozoological uh, some people call it a hoax. Some people say it's real. They really don't know. It's based off one story and one picture. But I kind of equated it to that, and that launched my interest in cryptozoology from a very young age. I was about 12. And so my dad's personal experience with an unknown creature, and
Mm-hmm.
then some other stories my dad told me about unknown. We call them unknown because they're not recognizable to science, which is what a cryptid is.
Right.
Cryptozoology is the study of hidden or unknown animals. A cryptid is a
Mhm.
subject of study of cryptozoology. And so, by definition, I grew up with cryptids.
Yeah.
We had venomous water snakes that would come into our swimming creek in the jungle, but there aren't supposed to be any venomous water snakes down there like that. We
Mm-hmm.
had birds that we couldn't identify. We had those large primates we couldn't identify. My dad tells a story of one time coming across a very large, he calls it an iguana, about an 8 foot long iguana that would come in and steal chickens and hunt down the chickens. This is not known behavior. This is not an
Interesting.
iguana, right? And so that just kind of launched it, going, hey, my family's experienced a lot of weird animals. So why don't I start researching what's out there? And that's what really led me into and piqued my interest going forward into cryptozoology. And then it got into anything weird. I'm not a cryptozoologist, I'm a 14 researcher. I love anything and everything that's strange, abnormal, out of the ordinary,
Mm-hmm.
preternatural. And I just kind of get into everything with it.
Well, I used to do a show with my son, right? I used to do he
Hmm.
and I did a show called Dive into the Depths.
Hmm.
And I have this huge book that I have that's filled with, tons of, thousands of articles from all around the world, from the early 1800s to like
Hmm.
current day. And interesting, I was just talking about this on a show the other night. And it's so interesting listening to the story about your dad, because one of the stories is very similar, where the explorer, he had a couple of natives with him, and they were kind of going down a river,
Hmm.
and they came across a couple of these primates, I guess. I can't remember exactly what his words were, but the interesting thing was is that when he described them, one of them was a female, and he
Hmm.
described her as beautiful. He described her very feminine and very, that she was very attractive. And one of the guys got a little scared, didn't know what to do, and went to fire on them. And he was like, no, 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 don't. Like, he stopped them from firing on them, and then they ran. And
Hmm.
that's just, so hearing that story and then thinking back to that article that he and Matt and I discussed probably a year ago now, is
Hmm.
it just, wow. I
Sure.
mean, it's pretty cool.
Yep. And one thing that I like to stress to people is, my dad and his other guys, there's a total of four on the team.
Mhm.
It's not like these are city guys that don't know, the city guy from New York coming out into the mountains for the first time and doesn't know what things are. You know, these guys spent years in training of
Yeah.
what to do. My dad grew up in the North Woods of Upper Michigan. He's a Vietnam veteran. He spent times in the jungles in Vietnam. Um, and when they went out into the jungle, they would go out for 6 to 9 weeks at a time, and they lived off the jungle. They hunted out there. They knew what was out there as far as the normal, what to expect. It was part of their training and part of their everyday life. And
Mhm.
so they knew what a big monkey looked like in the trees because they hunted them.
Yeah.
That was part of their life. And to see something like that, that's why they took notice. It wasn't the fact that there was
Mhm.
an animal. It was, wait a minute, that's like 5 times the size of anything that should be out there.
Yeah.
And that was it. And he didn't get like details or anything, but it
Yeah.
was just enough to take note of everything. And I use that as a reminder for even nowadays, right? Because how many times do we hear, whether it's a Bigfoot or a dogman sighting, oh, they just saw a bear? Well, most of the
Mhm.
time, the people that are out there know what bears look like. They're familiar with bears.
So
They
true.
know they know what it looks like. Like if you have a cat, you know how a cat moves. So if you see something and you can't identify it, but you see how it moves, you can say, "Oh, that was a cat," because of how it moved.
Mhm.
Bears are the same way, and if you're used to seeing a bear run across the road, you know it's a bear just by the movement of how it moved.
Right.
And
Right.
yet people want to go, oh, you just mistook a bear running across the road for a 9 foot tall Bigfoot walking across in 3 steps. And it's like, really, guys, that's absolutely absurd.
I know, I know, I know, I know. Because, like, in both of my encounters, like, I plus where I'm at and where I was at with this there are no bears. I mean, I'm not
Hmm.
saying Florida doesn't have bears. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying
No.
where I was, there are no bears, right? And it's kind of like I knew it wasn't a cat. I knew it wasn't, a black
Hmm.
panther. Like, I knew, like, there's only two things my mind could have said it was either this or it was that. And after watching it move, like you said, I'm like, well, yeah, that's definitely not either one of those.
Right.
So I
Yep.
totally get what you're saying for sure. Oh,
Yeah. It just
wow.
drives me nuts.
Yeah. Well, where's the like, okay, so you were in Upper Michigan, right? So
Yep. Yep.
I know there's a lot of reports, dogman
Yeah.
reports,
Yep.
in Upper Michigan. I know some people that actually, coexist with them,
Hmm.
and don't have any problems with them. Not that they're not causing any issues and they're coexisting with them just fine. Have you come across you know, any stories about Dogman in Upper Michigan that are, I don't know,
Uh, Probably
contrary to that?
nothing. No, probably nothing that y'all wouldn't have heard. Dogman is one of those ones where people are still relatively reluctant to talk about. They really are.
Mhm.
Um, you hear stories because I like to get firsthand reports from people. I'm what I call an archival researcher, which basically means I don't necessarily get out into the field. I'm not pulling up tracks and all this. I read reports and I talk to people. Um, and you know especially from up there, if you know anything about the folks in Upper Michigan, they're not going to talk to you at all if you're an outsider. I mean, people talk about like in Appalachia where I live now, if you're not one of them, they're not going to really give you a lot of respect and a lot of talk to you. But Upper Michigan is even worse. I mean, they're such a tight knit community, and
Mhm.
even with that, they're such a down to earth, practical people that they won't even like admit that they saw anything or experienced anything half the time.
Right.
Um, and a good example of this is I have a good friend of mine that's got several acres up there on his property, and he keeps complaining how he keeps finding deer and then sometimes his goats and livestock like hung up in trees on the back of his property. And I was talking to him. I said, "Listen, that's classic like Bigfoot sign or possibly dogman. Like that's not a normal thing." He's
Yeah.
like, "Nah." He's like, "That's just the mountain lions we got up here, eh?" And it's like, listen, dude, they don't do that. That's one of the things mountain lions don't do. That's not in their natural behavior. He's like, nah. He's like, it's fine. And that's it. He won't even
Yeah.
entertain the
You
idea if
won't
it's
go
anything
there.
unusual. And yet,
Yes.
within a couple miles of his house, I know of a research site that's really big, and they have documented Bigfoot sightings all over the place. And adjacent to that property, I heard a story. There was a guy who was out there hunting, and he had a big shooting lane cleared. And down along the shooting lane, he saw a Bigfoot walk across the shooting lane. Well, he told the investigator, and the investigator's like, "Oh man, can I come out and look for prints?" He's like, "Nah." He's like, "It's hunting season. You're not gonna come out here and scare up the deer." He's like, "You can
Mhm.
come in the spring once season's over." I mean that's the nature of their
Yeah.
practicality. They're just going, "Yeah, I saw it. Okay, it's not
Yeah.
wasn't a huge deal, you know." And so try and get people to talk about something like a dog man, or in their mind they don't know dog man, they don't know the
Mhm.
nomenclature. It's a werewolf. That's what they're seeing. They're not going to be very forthcoming. And so when you
Yeah.
do get reports, like I'm sure we've all heard the basic ones, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
um every now and then you come across some people that have some new information, and you get some new reports, and those are interesting, and I try and talk to them. But for the most part, it seems counterintuitive, but these things seem to not really want to interact on the normal. I think they're like a lot of predators in the fact that they only will come in and interact when they're forced to, when they're particularly hungry, when something's going on and they have to come into our space to steal food or whatever it is that they're doing. I think that's
Mhm.
kind of their MO, very much like Bigfoot. They don't want you to know that they're around,
Yeah.
you know, for the
But
most part.
excuse me. But I know that I've heard so many people talk about, "Oh, they don't get along. Bigfoot and Dogman don't get along. They don't have anything to do with each other." And yet, I've still spoken to people who tell me
Hmm.
that these beings are coexisting on their
Hmm.
properties
Hmm.
peacefully, peacefully. And
Well,
I and it blows my mind, but yet it doesn't blow my mind because look how many other animals live peacefully in the
ex-
woods
exactly.
all the time.
Exactly. Right. So again, I think it goes back to what I was just saying. They want to be left alone for the most part. If
Mhm.
they come across each other, then the reports indicate that sometimes they'll be aggressive, sometimes they'll just kind of be leery of each other, because they're both apex predators. They
Mhm.
know that they can do harm one to another that could be severe or fatal.
Right.
um, and I don't want to be a naysayer, but I always take some of the more fantastical reports with a grain of salt when it comes to, I was sitting on my back porch drinking sweet tea and I saw, Barney Bigfoot and big old dog man, and they got into a fight in my backyard. And
Mhm.
then I go, I'm not going to say it didn't happen. I wasn't there. I'm not going to call you a liar, you know? But at the same time, I go, if your
Mhm.
response to seeing two mythical creatures go like hands out battling is to sit on your rocking chair and just watch it
Drink your
happen.
sweet tea.
That's not a normal human response.
That's not a
And
normal
and
human
so
response.
I have to question a lot of that. You know what I mean? Now there
Yeah,
are some of the reports that sound more, and it's not that what they saw was so fantastical. Is they're describing themselves as being the most super chill person in the world.
yeah,
You know, and you got to kind of go, I don't know about that. You
yeah.
know, and so that's what I tell people. How do we know? Where do we get this idea? Like what's the foundation that Bigfoot and Dogman are so antagonistic to each other? Where's the data
Yes.
that
Where
backs
does
that
that
up?
come from? Yeah, where you're right about that. You
Mm-hmm.
hear people talking about it, but where is that data? Where is data that says that?
Yep.
Because
Uh,
I you're right. I've never actually heard anybody say, "Oh, I have audio of two of them fighting," or I have a video of two of them going at
mm-hmm.
each other, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would imagine and I'm only basing this on, after talking, I'm very good friends with, Shane and Randy,
Mm-hmm.
and their particular research area is private land. There's really no one there but them. And Shane is he's a professional tracker. So Shane has been
Mm-hmm.
able to, over many, many years, many seasons, been able to kind of see this circular cohabitation that they're doing, that
Yeah.
they're, I would imagine that it would be like us, right? We're going to be
Mm-hmm.
following where the berries are, or where the deer go, or you know what I mean? They're not like
Yeah.
taking and getting rid of all their resources in one area. You know what I'm saying? There's
Yep.
this like pattern to what they're doing as they're
Absolutely.
moving through. So I
Yeah.
would think that at some point they would possibly run into each other somehow, some way, but I would imagine they give each other a very wide berth. That's my
Sure.
opinion. That's just my opinion.
And they're going to happen if we look at nature as our guide, right? Because when
Mhm.
studying the unknown, you have to kind of go with the known and kind of
Mhm.
piece it together from there, right? And
Mhm.
large predators live alongside each other all the time with no bad
Mhm.
interactions. It's only on the occasion where there's a competition for food or resources, or
Yeah.
a territorial issue,
Mhm.
or something's in the rut and so they're already kind of angry anyway.
Mhm.
There are going to be some interaction, so I'm definitely not saying it doesn't happen, but what I'm saying is I think they probably try to coexist. It's not an animosity thing where it's like they can't be together on the same property, or they're not going to
Right.
be like, oh, there's one here, I'm gonna hunt it down and kill it. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think
Right. Yeah, I
that's the
don't think that's on
normal.
their
I don't think that's
agenda.
the normal.
Yeah.
One of the things I caution people about all the time is trying to put these things all into one behavioral category,
Mhm.
right? Like all Bigfoot are always going to always do this, and it's like, no, I don't think that's real. If these
Mhm.
are what we believe they are, as highly sentient, intelligent creatures, they're not all going to all act the same way, just like humans don't always all act in the same way. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And so for people to say Bigfoot always does this, well, you can't really say that, you know.
Right.
We could, like, over the years with my research, I've kind of developed patterns, like behavioral patterns, and I understand, um, if I hear something, I can go, oh, yes, I've heard that before. I relate to that. I've heard that here, 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 and here. And it kind of fits into this pattern. And what I mean by that is, okay, let's look at a family group, right? We have a family group, but then we hear about the Sasquatches that are coming in and terrorizing and hurting people, and they're downright vicious. Well, that individual to me sounds like a rogue individual. Like, a
Mhm.
lot of times when you have especially like primates that have a familial group, every now and then, for whatever reason, some will be ostracized from a group, whether it's a male reaching sexual maturity and he has to go out and find his own clan, or an alpha male has been displaced and so he's no longer welcome in the clan and he has to go
Right.
off. They're going to have a different behavioral pattern
Mhm.
than, say, a family group. You know what I mean?
Right,
Or
right.
you might have the type of family group that prefers to stay aloof way out in the mountains, and they completely shy away from any human activity. And then you're going to have a family group that has decided it wants to live on this property, and that's where they're going to stay. And over the years, they become
Mhm.
accustomed to the humans' patterns, and maybe they interact with those humans,
Right.
right? And then you might have a family clan that lives in a national forest right adjacent to a big city, and they come into the skirts of town and raid the dumpsters and trash
Mhm.
cans, and maybe they steal people's pets, right? Those are all different biomes, different environments where
Right.
the behaviors are going to be different. And we have to look at that when we look at this, the behavior patterns of these things, right? Like, they
Right.
are going to be different. They're not going to be the same. And it's going to be the same thing with dogman. That might be a different type of structure, but we hear reports of packs. We hear reports of individuals. We hear the same kinds of reports with them. And
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
just logically thinking without any extra data that we can't get, we have to assume a similar pattern.
Correct.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And they're
Mhm.
going to come across, but just like any big predators, they don't want to risk extra harm to themselves if they don't have to.
Right. Right.
Even if these things are more than just a base animal, that's still the logic. As humans, the
Mhm.
norm is to not risk ourselves more than we have to, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And so I don't think they're going to be all out having a war every time they see. It's not like a gang war where one gang member sings the other gang member and they're always trying to kill each other. I just don't think that's a reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I because in my 2 encounters, they were ve they were very they were night and day, literally night and day. One was at night and one was during the day, you know what I mean? Like, they
Mhm.
really were, like, completely different. The first one, it was at night, and it definitely had that Patty type body, that it was black, was all black, like, it was, like, if you would think Patty in your head, like, that's
Mhm.
the body type.
Right.
But my daytime sighting was not like that at all. And it was
Mhm.
and I felt, at my during the nighttime sighting, when I see this thing, I mean, it's 8.5 feet tall. I mean, this thing is big. It's huge. It's like, it's massive. And I'm like, I was scared. I mean, I'm not gonna say I wasn't scared, but like, I was really scared. The daytime sighting that I had was so different. It was
Mhm.
very peaceful. It was very calming. It was very just kind of like, I just it was like, there he was, and we just, like, locked eyes, and we just kind
Mhm.
of, like, stared at each other, and then he just, like, slid down like a periscope, like, down into the scrub brush, and you're like, "Okay, he's gone," I don't know, he's gone, but it was very, it was, auburn, beautiful, beautiful, shiny auburn hair, and didn't have a conical head. It didn't, it had a very round head. It was
Mhm.
basketball player looking. It wasn't that big, gigantic, broad, it was totally different. I mean, there has to be an individuality to them. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. And
You
I
know?
know there's the charts out there that break it down into, type 1, type 2 and all this kind of stuff,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
that may be the case. I totally understand where they're getting that from. But I also look at the idea of it might just be individuality. It might just be genetics. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm. Yeah.
there could be a larger set of dimorphism than we understand. Males and females may have more differences than we understand. Maybe conical heads are a male and female thing. Maybe they're
Mhm.
not. Maybe it's something they develop at an age line. Maybe it's just a random
Good point.
genetic trait.
Good
You
point.
know, like we don't know, and that's where it's hard. I really try and differentiate in my research what we know
Mhm.
versus what we can assume versus
Yes.
what we believe, and I think that's really important. I think a
Yes.
lot of people get lost in that.
Yeah.
You know, the only
Yeah.
thing we can say 100% for sure is that for thousands of years, people have been reporting creatures that look like
Yes.
this.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
that
Yes.
is literally the only
Yes.
thing we can say, right?
Mhm.
People find footprints. Fact. What causes the footprints? We think we know.
We think we know.
Yeah, right. And we can say, well, if you saw them lay down the track line, then you know what caused that footprint.
Right.
That right. But beyond that, everything else is really speculation
Yes.
and just educated guesses. And I say educated
Mhm.
because again, there's a lot of us out here have been doing this for a very long time.
Mhm.
And we've gone over thousands of reports, or we've read, 30, 40, 50 books, or
Right.
all of the above, and at that point you can start going, I see a pattern, I see something going on here.
Mhm.
um, One of the things that always gets me is when a fan will come in to the field and get all excited, and they'll start talking about a subject that's already been hashed to death. And it's okay that they're excited about it, but then they try and put out all these theories, and it's like, well, that's already been handled. Like we're past that. That's old research.
Right.
Let's get into
Right.
new
Right.
stuff. And one of the things I bring up for an example of that is the case of Zana. Are you familiar with the story of
Yes.
Zana? Okay. The
Yes, I
Zana
know
story
that
has been
story.
laid to rest. They know what happened with Zana. They know exactly what Zana was. Okay. DNA studies have proven she was a human from sub-Saharan Africa. And if you look at the time frame where her story occurs, there was a slave trade route that went through the mountains where she was found. And so the most 100% probability was that she will either escaped from slavers or was let loose from slavers somehow. She was on her own, and she was found by the villagers of that town. They had never seen a black person like that before. They had never seen
Mhm.
somebody from the sub-Saharan continent. She
Mhm.
was completely new to them. That is just like me growing up with our natives,
Right. Right.
and my dad doing contact work. He was trying to find natives that had never seen a white person before. So can you imagine if my dad had walked into this village where they had
Mhm.
never ever ever seen a white, they had never seen clothing before,
Mhm.
they had never seen anybody with a beard or a mustache before? How alien would they look? How would they describe that? They'd have
Yes.
no idea. And that's what happened with the Zana story. But there's still people today that promote Zana as a Bigfoot or
And
an
she
Almasty. And
yeah, and
it's
there was
not.
I mean, she has some surviving children
Yeah.
who also had children. So, I mean, it's not
Yep.
like we didn't have DNA that we can test. It's not like we didn't, like
Exactly.
these things have been proven. So, yeah,
And that's
yeah,
what happened.
perfect
Dr.
example.
Igor was the one
Igor
heading that up.
birth
And
chef, right?
yeah,
Igor birth,
Dr.
yeah.
Igor Bersha. And he wanted to prove Zana was a Bigfoot. That was the whole purpose of his research, was
Mhm.
to prove Zana was an Almasty or some kind of hominid creature.
Right.
And he was disappointed, but he followed the science and said, I have to admit, the science says Zana was 100% human, and that's all there
Yeah.
was to it.
Yeah.
But people to this day will bring up the Zana story,
And there,
but
yeah.
leave out the part where we've already
Where
figured out what she was, you
yes.
know? And that
Yes.
drives me nuts when people do stuff like that. But that happens all the time, and it's happening more and more frequently.
Mhm.
I think in the field as people come in, and it's not like I'm saying we don't want people to come in and be excited. We want them to, but we don't need to be going over all the old research every time and people coming out and making claims and going, well, no, you're not moving anything forward at that point. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I got a question.
Yeah.
Mike from Abnormal Investigations. Justin, do you believe these Bigfoot and upright canine creatures are animals or Nephilim descendants?
Mike, yeah, abnormal investigations. You would ask that. Okay. So here's the thing with me and the way I work. Words have meanings, right?
Yeah.
And first, we have to define some things. What is a Nephilim by definition? A Nephilim is something that is mentioned in biblical text and extra biblical text. It is the definition of the coupling of a fallen angel or a watcher, as they call them in the book of Enoch, and a human female. And they created a race called Nephilim, a mixing of angelic and human DNA, which was never supposed to happen. It was an abomination in the sight of God, according to the text. And so, by very definition, they're not Nephilim. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a but there, because if we're going to believe what the texts tell us, these angelic beings also corrupted the flesh of animals. It doesn't necessarily specify how, but it said they corrupted the flesh of animals. And so it's this idea of either they mixed their own kind of DNA with animals. Some people believe, they did it that way. Some people think they mixed different animal DNAs together, all these different things. So if we use the word Nephilim loosely, saying, is it the product of these fallen angels and messing around with living DNA? That would be a possibility if that's your worldview. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't have an issue with that. The issue I come in is when people talk about Nephilim as if they're a direct descendant of human and angel. If you're going to use that, you have to use the rest of the Bible for your reference. Okay, you can't just isolate that little chunk. The Bible talks about descendants of Nephilim. They're called Raphaim, Goliath and his brothers, and the line of giants, the king of Nod, I believe it was. They were all descendants of Nephilim, and they were all human. They weren't creatures. They were human, loosely being the word. They looked like us. They were just giants. They were bigger than us. Yes, they had
Mm-hmm.
things like 6 fingers, 6 toes. Some say double rows of teeth, but they were still like human. They weren't like monsters. They weren't like Bigfoot. They weren't hairy and
Yeah.
ape-like looking. And that's going by the same text where we get the whole idea of Nephilim from. So if we're going to use that text, we have to stay true to that. You see
Right.
what I'm saying? So
Right.
could they
Right.
be a product of that, DNA messing up and messing with the very possible?
Mm-hmm.
Are they Nephilim? I do not believe they are Nephilim or descendants of Nephilim, but they could be a genetic manipulation between supernatural beings and normal beings. That's a
Right.
possibility, because again, we don't know what they are, where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I am not going to say they're not, but they're definitely not Nephilim by definition.
Yeah, I'm very I'm very, very into the definition of words and
Hmm.
and the context.
Right.
The context, because I think that a lot of things do get taken out of context. Pull one little word from here and then one little word from over here. And if you don't have the full context of the story, or,
Yeah.
because that's when things get jumbled up, and
Yeah.
it's easy for people who aren't students of that type of history or those kinds of subjects. It's very
Hmm.
easy to get misled by just kind of picking out a word and picking out a word, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
It's
yeah,
the
it's
same
important.
thing. On my show, I do a thing every now and then, like I call it like Bigfoot urban legends, which is things that we hear and we just accept in the Bigfoot community. The one show that I did was about Eric Leif Erikson, the Viking, meeting
Mhm.
Bigfoot, and everybody's heard this. The first recorded sighting of Bigfoot was Leif Erikson in 986 A.D. Blah 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 blah. That's completely false. Never happened. Never happened. Completely made up. And I go through a whole thing proving that it was a completely
Mhm.
fabricated story. Well, the same thing with the church, the Mormon church. People say the Mormon church believes that Bigfoot is a descendant of Cain or is Cain. They're Canaanites. And you contact a Mormon and ask a Mormon if they believe that, 99% of them are going to say no, they don't. That is one story, and it is of itself a Mormon urban legend kind of thing. That this supposedly happened, that a Mormon preacher was walking down the road and a Bigfoot came out, and they
Mhm.
carried on this conversation walking down the road together, and that's where the idea came from. And that's not canon in the Mormon church. That's not part of their teachings. That's not a normal thing for them,
Right.
you know? But it's because that happened and somebody told that story, it's been disseminated within the Bigfoot community that
Mhm.
Mormons believe that. And it's like, that's a stretch, because most Mormons don't. And I've talked to Mormons, I've researched it, I've Googled it, I've gone on to Mormon like Facebook pages and stuff, and it's not a commonly held belief. We just happen to think it
Interesting.
is because we take it as face value when somebody tells us this.
Yeah, and see, that is a like, that's part of the problem too,
Hmm.
is that we see what we see on Facebook, and we just we're like, "Okay, we're gonna accept it. It's gotta be true because it's on Facebook."
Yeah. And I was guilty of that too with the whole Viking thing. I was guilty of that. The reason I found out about it is I was getting ready to do a presentation at a conference. And so I was putting together some data points, and basically the presentation was, why do I believe without ever having experience, right? I've never seen a Bigfoot. Why do I believe in Bigfoot? And one
Right.
of my points is historical accounts, historical data. And I was getting ready to use that one. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I don't have any citations. How do I back this up? And so when I started digging into it, I realized there was no real foundation to it. And so I
Yes.
didn't put it in my presentation. And then later on, I dug deeper into it. But I
Yeah.
took it as face value for years because that's what we were told. I'd seen it in so many other people's
Mhm.
presentations and on YouTube and in books and stuff.
I mean, I saw on Facebook, I don't know, it was probably a year or so ago now, a research group. I'm not gonna say who because that point, that's part doesn't matter, but I saw them, they posted a photo of a track, and they said, that this was a panther track, and I'm
Hmm.
like, "Mm, uh, eh." So, I went
Hmm.
to Google, and I'm like, I Googled panther tracks, like, what do they look like? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, and sure enough, what they were posting, it was just a misidentification. I don't believe it was a
Right.
hoaxing thing. It was a
Right.
misidentification because it had claws. Panther tracks do not. Felines do not leave claw marks. Only canines do. Only,
Hmm.
felines retract their claws, right? And I was like, "Oh." I even sent it to a couple trackers that I know, and I'm like, "Hey, I kinda did a little try to do a little fact check in, and I'm thinking this is a misidentification. Can you take a look at this?" I didn't tell them what I thought it was. I didn't even tell them,
Right.
I'm like, "This is what they're saying it is, but can you tell what do you think?" And
Right.
they both of them came back, was like, "Yeah, no, that's canine. That's definitely a canine track." But it's not like I went back and was like, "Hey, that's a canine track." But I I I at least fact checked it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Because 'Cause I'm
Yeah.
not gonna go and attack anybody over it. but we have to start critically thinking and fact checking and asking questions. There's
I agree.
nothing wrong with asking people questions if you see things on Facebook. Of course, no, just because it's happened to me. If you ask too many questions, you might get thrown out the group.
Hmm. Yeah, I've had that happen more than once, right? Because I'm the same
Just
way, and then
FYI, but ask them
we
anyway.
these are the reasons why, as a community, we're not taken seriously.
Right.
Because if we're posting a canine print and we're calling it a panther print, how reliable is any of our information?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like
Yes.
that totally
Yes.
throws it out. And I agree with that. Like, um, there's been a picture going around of a wild boar stuck in a tree.
Okay.
Okay. There's been a
Uh-huh.
picture of this, and people are going, "Oh, look, only a Bigfoot could do that. Look at this." And it got posted into one of my private chat rooms. And I said, "Well, let's critically look at this. Let's look at the picture. What do we know about the picture?" And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, well, this dead animal was stuck into a tree." And I'm going, "Well, how do you know it's dead? I don't see any wounds. I don't see any damage. I don't see any blood. We don't know
Mm-hmm.
what this is. All we can say is this animal is stuck in this tree. That's it. We can't say anything else. Anything else is completely conjecture."
Yeah.
And so what I did is I did a Google reverse image search. Okay, just on that
Yeah.
picture. And I got a YouTube link. It was a video from some Indo-Pacific, like Indonesia or Philippines or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even say somebody put it. The pig was stuck in a tree and it was squealing and wiggling around, and there was people laughing at this pig stuck in this tree. So right then and there, we know it's not dead. We know that it's not a Bigfoot thing. Well, we assume it's not a Bigfoot thing because people are sitting there laughing. There's chickens running around like it's somebody's farm, so right there.
Yeah.
And I posted this, and I shared this on Facebook with people saying, "Hey, I understand, but this is where that picture came from. This is
Yeah.
where it came from." And even after that, on the same pages, the same people were reposting that picture as evidence of Bigfoot activity. And it's like we can't be doing that kind of stuff, guys.
Yes, they make
We're
that big, gigantic leap.
Yeah.
They, yeah.
And as a researcher, if you're gonna call yourself a researcher, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that. That invalidates any research you may have. And you might have a whole bunch of amazing ideas and you may have the right theories. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to do stuff like that, then you're not going to be taken seriously as a researcher. That's
Right.
why there are so many groups out there that go, we're only going to present research that we can
Yeah.
back up what
Yes.
happened. And
Yes.
people make fun of those guys. Oh, you don't believe? Like I've been told so many times, I don't believe. I don't believe in dogman. I don't believe in Bigfoot. I don't believe in this and that. And it's like, guys, I believe stronger than most people do. But if we're going to try and be serious and present stuff to a community,
Mm-hmm.
we have to back stuff up. We can't just say, this is
No.
what it is, and you have to believe me because I said so.
Yep.
We can't do that. It's the same thing in the paranormal, same thing with ghosts, same thing with UFOs, same thing with
Mm-hmm.
aliens. Any type of Fortean research that you do, you have to have data to back it up,
Back
and you
it up.
have to be clear. You have to be clear when something is fact, when something is assumption,
Mm-hmm.
and then when something is like a theory that you put together. And you have to be clear on that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I talk about it all the time. Like my son and I, when we research together, I mean, there's plenty of times where I'm like, well, I think this. And he'll be like, well, no. He'll
Right?
be like, no. Or he'll
Hmm.
be like, I think this. And I'll be like, no. I mean, there's plenty of times, but I'll tell you what, if we don't agree on it, it doesn't get posted. If we don't
Right.
agree on it, it doesn't get passed around. If we don't agree on it, we go to other people and we're like, hey, Matt's thinking this. I'm thinking, like he and I went out and did a live a few weeks ago and he was using the night vision. He
Mm-hmm.
said, I think he goes, I'm looking at eye shine. He was like, I got some eye shine or something. But it was like when he was looking at it through the night vision, he was seeing it and it's kind of shaky video, right? And it's like
Right.
because he's like doing like this because he couldn't see it with
Yeah.
his naked eye, right? But yet he's seen it this way. So he's thinking, oh, it's eye shine. I look at the video, I'm like, that ain't that is not eye shine. That's like one thing. Like, Matt, this thing looks really weird. This thing looks like a ball of energy moving just one, like that big. And it's like moving. You can see it going in front of and behind, like the trees, and like you see it moving. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, Matt, I think it was an orb. He goes, oh, but if it was an orb, I would have seen it with my naked eye. And I'm like, well, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, I
I
mean,
post
right.
I
Think
did
about it.
post it. I did post
Mm-hmm.
it because I found it
Yeah.
to be super weird, but I don't know what it is. I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
because it looks way too big and it's only one, so I don't know how it could have been eye shine of any kind, and
Sure.
I don't know what it is. It's
Well, and
weird.
you said you're using like night vision, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so is it the infrared based night vision or heat based night vision? Because there's two different kinds.
He was using both, but the one that he caught it on was not it wasn't the FLIR, it was just a regular 4K night vision, so the
Okay.
IR.
Okay. So it's
Yeah,
using basically infrared and ambient light sources to pick up, right? And
yeah,
so in a situation like that, you're not if it was eye shine, well, what's the definition of eye shine? It's a
it's a
shining eye that
reflection
you
it's
can see, right?
reflecting back,
It,
right.
it it's reflecting, or some people believe self-illuminating for Bigfoot,
Mhm,
right? Possibility. But that's like literally the definition of it. So it wouldn't be eye shine if you couldn't see it with your naked eye, period.
mhm,
Right? By again, just by definition. But okay, so energy comes in lots of different forms. So even if you couldn't see it with your naked eye, doesn't mean it's not
it's not
there.
there, right,
So it could definitely
yeah,
have been an orb. It just wasn't emitting a physical light. It could have been, a heat source or infrared light. Because, as we've talked a little bit, I believe there's lots of things out there that us as humans are just not able to perceive because it's not
perceive
within
it,
our
spectrum,
ability, right?
radar,
It's not in our
yeah,
spectrum.
yeah,
Exactly. And
yeah,
I based my entire uh, theory of everything, I guess you could call it, based on that aspect of the things that we experience aren't necessarily within our spectrum, and
mhm,
that's why it's so strange to
mhm,
us. That's why
yeah.
it's so weird to us.
Let me see if
And
I
so,
can
go ahead.
pull it up. Yeah, keep going, I'm gonna see if I can find
Uh,
it, and I'll
well,
show
just
it
that
to you.
idea of when we're using different equipments and we're using different
Yep,
things, we have to understand and be able to interpret what it is we're using and how we see it. You know what I mean? Um,
yeah,
Brian asked this question here, and I wanted to answer it because it relates to what we were just talking about. He said, if you find an animal in a tree, but you also find an 18-inch track, do you think the Bigfoot put it there, or does one walk by the tree? And so that's what I look for to be able to say something, right? And I'll change it from an animal to a tree to a structure. Okay. If we find a structure, all we can say is this exists in the woods until we start really analyzing it, right? If we have a structure and we can show there's Bigfoot tracks around it, we could associate to a degree that structure with Bigfoot. That makes sense to me, right? Same thing with an animal in a tree. If there's a deer hanging up in a tree and I find a Bigfoot track, and if you're looking, you'll probably find more sign than just one track. But even if you find one track, I can therefore, at least to a degree, associate Bigfoot with that animal in the tree, right? My problem comes in when you have four sticks leaning together and people call it a structure. And I also look at purpose and I go, well, how do we know it's Bigfoot? Well, a human couldn't do that. That doesn't fly with me because humans can do a lot of things that we necessarily wouldn't think they would, you know? Um, I have seen people pick up trees that I couldn't pick up. I mean, that's just how it is.
Right.
I'm in my younger days, I was a fairly strong young man and I could pick up things a lot of other people couldn't pick up. I mean, that's just how it is. And so just by saying by its mere existence, a person couldn't do it, I don't think is a good data point. Um, but if you can find hairs, you can find prints, you can find other things that might indicate a Bigfoot's there, then that leads more to the possibility that it was a Bigfoot doing that. That's a very good question, Brian.
Okay, I'm gonna go full screen on that. So,
Okay.
okay, so oh wait, that's the wrong full screen. This full
There we go.
screen, that's full screen. Okay, now where you're gonna be looking at is going to be, let's see if you guys can see my cursor. If I put it, it's gonna be like right, like kind of right in here.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So let me, and you see it kind of like, why this bar? And you're gonna kind of see it kind of flash.
Oh
You
yeah.
see, you see how it kind of like goes in, and you can see there's bugs flying around. You see that there's
Right.
bugs,
Yeah.
but they're not illuminated. But you see how it goes, like it goes in front of and behind things. And Matt, and like I said, it's shaky because Matt's kind of like he's looking and then he's trying to like, wait, what am I looking at? Like, and he kept
Right.
saying, I'm seeing eye shine. I'm seeing eye shine. And it was just the most bizarre thing. I think this is only like a minute
That
long
is
clip.
interesting.
Isn't that weird? And then
Yeah.
he's looking for it because it just disappears. He's
Now I
kind of
know this
looking.
is in Florida. And
Mhm.
so right away, I'm going through, eliminations in my mind. People are going to say, oh, it's lights from a car. Um, the problem with that is it's somewhat elevated and there are no hills in Florida.
Right.
So that's
Yeah,
going to be that aspect of it. You don't
I'll
see
show
any
it.
other light source in the back.
No, I'll show it one
Um,
more time.
and you couldn't see it with the naked eye. So that's something that's interesting as well.
Mhm. And you can see that there's bugs flying around. Like you see
Right.
them.
Yeah.
And but you see
Yeah.
how there it comes out right there and it's like a ball of light or like it looks like a
Yep.
swirling ball of energy or something.
And it's moving on a singular trajectory. It's not bouncing around as much as it is traveling just across the screen at a steady pace.
Right. It's super weird, right?
That's weird.
And you know what? I'm always complaining because I've never seen an orb. And I'm always
Right?
complaining to everybody. I'm like, I've never seen an orb. And here we are. We're out there. He gets this thing, whatever it is. And I don't get to see
Sure.
it.
Interesting. It didn't look like it was a reflection. It looked like it was self illuminating.
Yeah.
Didn't look like a reflection. Um,
It's
I would
weird,
almost
right?
would have it, and it didn't flare, right? Because usually in that type of IR, if it's an actual light source, you're going
Uh-huh.
to get that flaring. You're going to get that kind of blinding
Mm-hmm.
effect to it, and that didn't happen either. So that's very intriguing.
It's a weird
Um,
one.
and what I like is the fact that we're saying we don't know what it is. We're not going
Yeah.
to call
I have
it
no idea.
this. We're not going to call it that. We're
Yeah.
just going to say that's very cool,
Yeah.
but it's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is cool. It's very weird,
Hmm.
and people that I've seen have seen it. They're like, "Oh, it's an orb," and I'm like, "Listen, I'm not saying it's an orb. I'm just saying it was a very strange anomaly." Which
Sure.
brings us back to your point. There's a lot of stuff out there. A
Hmm.
lot of stuff out there. It
Yep.
doesn't mean, like when I tell people, I'm like, I mean, I've had a lot of strange, weird encounters, but I'm gonna tell you, I've had fairies. I've had issues with fairies. I've had,
Hmm.
elementals. I've had some very strange, phenomena happen to me. And
Sure.
I don't I mean, it could be who knows what it is or who knows what it could possibly be. But
Right.
don't tell me, or not you, but I mean anybody, like, don't tell
Yeah.
me that the only thing that's out there are just like, animals and Bigfoot
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
and dogman. Like, there's
Yeah.
plenty of other things. There's a lot of paranormal. And again, going back to the words,
Yes.
right? Anything outside of the norm, anything outside of the normal is paranormal.
Paranormal.
Paranormal does
Exactly.
not necessarily mean paranormal doesn't mean ghosts.
Right.
It's
Anything
anything
and
that's
everything.
outside of the norm.
Exactly. Exactly. And, I get not so much anymore, but I come from
Really?
a strict upbringing. I don't want to say strict. How do I say it? Very religious kind of upbringing. I was raised very
Mhm.
much in the Christian faith and the Christian ideas, and I still hold to the Christian beliefs through the Bible. Not necessarily um, orthodoxy as far as I don't believe this, I believe that kind of a stuff.
Mhm.
Because I do believe in the supernatural realm and the paranormal realm, and I believe in a lot of this. And I get people that ask me, how can you be a Christian and still believe all this stuff? I said, well, it's very easy.
Very
It's
easy.
really not that hard because when you have multiple cultures over millennia
Yes.
describing the same things. They may not use the same words, and they
Mhm.
might have developed different mythologies around what they're experiencing because that's what
Mhm.
people do.
Mhm.
But the way my brain is very logical, and I kind of look through the coding of what they call something, and then I look to what the core of it is, and you
Yeah.
would be surprised how much of it is the same the same fairy tales that we get from the UK with fairies and banshees and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
If you
Yes.
take away the name and you take away the mythos around it, it's the same kind of stuff that the Native Americans see, the same kind of stuff the Asians see, the same kind of
Mhm.
thing on the India continent. They're all describing the same basic entities and phenomenon
Mhm.
using different
Different
words,
words.
and they're putting them in different categories. Some call them gods,
Yeah.
some call them spirits, some call them fairies. Some, and they have all these
Mhm.
different attributes. And if you can cut through all that, you realize that it's all the same basic categorization of stuff.
Mhm.
And then you realize that if I'm thinking logically, they can't all have made up the same stories, the
Right.
same entity. Something had to be a foundation for the
I
start
agree.
of it all. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so when I
Yeah.
hear these different stories, trolls or
Yes.
elves are different,
Puppies.
everywhere you go.
Did you
Sometimes
hear
trolls are. Go ahead.
I had Christopher Balzano, and you probably know him because he's over there on your coast on, when you're over
Hmm.
that way. And I had him on and I was like, "Hey, what is your weirdest cryptid you've ever written about?" And he starts talking about this thing called a stikini. And it's like this owl. It's almost like an owl mixed with like a banshee that's kind
Uh
of
huh.
Native American, and how they screech like crazy. And it's funny. I've never heard of this cryptid before ever until I talked to him. And the
Hmm.
funny thing is when he started describing this scream thing that it does, I can't tell you how many people reached out to me and was like, "I have heard that. I have heard that.
Right.
I've heard that out in the swamps. I've heard that." And I'm like, "Interesting."
Right. So then you have to go. Did they hear the sound and created a story as to what made the sound?
I don't
Or
know.
or if you look into it, okay, so an owl is essentially a bird of prey. Okay.
Right?
And if it's kind of mixed with a human kind of creature, so either a
Mhm.
shapeshifter or some kind of how many other cultural stories do we have of creatures that are part human, part bird,
Yeah.
right?
All these
Mexican
chimeras.
culture, right? We have harpies in Greek culture. We have the Mexican culture with they have
Yeah.
a specific type of bruja that does that. I forgot the name of it off the top of my head, But all around the world, we have this culture of people talking about either screeching like a banshee, right? Things like
Yep.
that, or, um, you know, bird human creatures that are terrifying and they fly around. So who's to say it's not a real thing? Again, it's cross cultural. Then not everybody's making it up,
Yes.
you know?
Exactly.
Brian,
Exactly.
did you really bring up melon heads?
He did bring up Melonhead. Well, you and I should do a show on Melonhead with Brian, except he has to leave the sweet and low box in his
No sweet
freezer.
and low box.
No
No sweet
sweet
and
and
low
low box.
box.
And if anybody wants to know what's in that sweet and low box, I ain't saying. I ain't saying.
Melon heads, again, I've researched melon heads and the story behind them. It's an urban legend, may have some basis in reality. And it's not just Michigan, Brian. All over the Midwest, the same story kind of gets passed around for the melon heads.
Yeah, we'll have
And
to
I
do.
wouldn't
You
call
and
it a
I have to
cryptid.
do a. We'll have to do a Melonhead show just and with
It'd be a
Brian.
good show. It'd be a good show.
It would be a great show. Let's do it. Brian, you up for that? You up for that? He says require Chris says require sweet and low or no deal.
That's fun.
Oh, we might let him show his sweet and low box at the end of the show, maybe, huh, Justin? Maybe. You never know.
Just as a teaser, stay to the end and
Yeah,
see the sweet and low,
I know. Well,
like the old fashioned carnies.
right, right, right. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun,
Oh,
and you gotta
absolutely.
come back. You gotta come back, and
Hmm.
we'll have to do some more, and maybe we will. Maybe we'll come up, maybe we'll do some stuff together and do a few other episodes on different things because
Sure.
I like to talk about all of these different types of things that are misidentifications and some that
Hmm.
are very, very have very long histories and all kinds of folklore around the world. And I
Hmm.
love talking to people like yourself that have really put the research in and can really bring good, solid information to people because I love that. That's what my channel is about.
Oh,
So
and that's what I've always been about. I always tell people I'm a nerd at heart. I am 100% a nerd. And if this was 500 years ago, I would be the scholar monk down in the basement of some monastery somewhere, reading all the ancient manuscripts. That's just who I am. Always have been. And only recently have I actually started getting out and talking about this. But it's always been a passion of mine just learn and absorb as much as I possibly can about our world and everything out there.
Tammy Johnson, tell Justin the name of the witch is called what is it?
Well,
Lorander?
Yorandar. Yeah,
Oh,
it's a double
okay.
L, so it's a
Oh,
Y
oh,
sound in Spanish. Yeah.
oh,
All right.
okay.
Yeah. I knew there was a specific word for it. I just didn't know she's classified under bruja, which basically just means witch,
A witch. Okay,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but there's
So
a
she's a bruja.
specific one that turns into like a owl or a bird of prey kind of mixture and carries off
Okay.
people and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe we could just do a show on that and talk about some really weird, obscure,
Sure.
cryptids. That'd be great.
We, we can do that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been so much fun tonight having you here, and I can't wait to have
Uh,
you back.
Thanks for having me on. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it. It's been a great
yeah,
time, great audience.
yeah,
Love everybody.
yeah. It's been fun. Thank you.
Hmm.
So, if you want to hang out for me just a minute and while I say goodnight to everybody in the green room.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Justin, so much.
Yep.
Well, guys, another amazing show in the books. It was a lot of fun. Justin just brings such a different perspective and has such an amazing background. And I love having thought-provoking conversations, and he really brought it for me tonight. And I always be grateful. And Brian, we're gonna book that show. Maybe Chris might want to even be a part of that show with us. Hint, 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 hint. Thank you guys for being here tonight. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. And please do not forget to spread love and kindness wherever you go. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Good night.